So I'll start by saying that some of you perhaps were expecting me to give a presentation very focused on McLaren as a business. What I would add is I recently left McLaren, so I've had to change my format slightly due to obviously some confidentiality clauses. So I'm not going to focus specifically on McLaren. That said, there'll of course be some learnings and some experiences that I'm going to embed into my wider articulation of what I want to talk about today. The reason I chose this first picture, and I'll just come out the way, is that when we talk about supply chain transformation or procurement transformation, we often talk about data or an abundance of data. And actually, if some of you were on the panel discussion that we just had, we talked about data quite a lot. Well, actually, what you can see there is a steering wheel of a Formula One car. And if you think about what the driver needs, he needs data. He needs data immediately or as close to real time as possible so that he can change the dynamics and the attributes of the vehicle, a bit like how we want to change the dynamics and the performance of our businesses. So there's a similarity for me in terms of what a Formula One steering wheel can bring versus what a business is aspiring to do. So just a little bit of an intro into myself. Because I'm not presenting for any specific company, more my experiences over the number of years. I'm going to talk a little bit about common challenges in industry or supply chain 4.0. I'm going to talk a little bit about finding your why, which is about understanding who you are as a business and what's important to you. And then I'm going to talk about two different things. One is an operating model. And the reason why operating model is very, very important for all of us to consider. And then perhaps one of the hot topics of the moment, certainly of the last couple of years or more, resiliency and sustainability. And importantly, I'm going to talk to you about how you can actually attain or work towards it, not you need to do it, which is what everyone's saying, right? Everyone says you need to be resilient. Well, yeah, what does it mean? Okay, I'm going to try and give you an insight how you actually work towards making that organisation resilient. So, very quick overview. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, early career in aerospace with Rolls-Royce, the early 90s, moving through to my own consulting organisation, working with Airbus and Jaguar Land Rover, then focusing on automotive in terms of Delphi, moving into logistics in automotive space at Syncreon, and then really going into the consultancy business with Tata Consultancy Services and Capgemini before working for McLaren as the logistics director for their automotive business. So that's my career progression in terms of the companies that I've worked for. Some of the companies that I've either worked for directly or I've consulted for and worked with, you can see there's a number of different logos that you'll all be familiar with. There's a heavy emphasis on aerospace and defence, automotive, and I've done a lot of work with logistics services who actually are becoming more prevalent in the digital space, and actually the services and the capabilities that they can offer you if you're considering kind of outsourcing capabilities. So simple slide this one, but I kind of quite like it because of its simplicity. For those of you that struggle with supply chain and what it means in today's world, in the complexity that we all have to deal with, in the abundance or the volume of changes that we all feel, the stress, it's tricky, and it's okay for you to feel confused or agitated or not quite sure how to progress resiliency or sustainability or transformation even. So if this guy struggles with it, if he recognises it's difficult, then I think it's okay for any of us to recognise it ain't easy. So we all need to take a step back and recognise supply chain's tricky. So supply chain code of change. So just really a few thoughts in terms of the common challenges that I see in not only the organisations that I've worked directly for in the last few years, but also the organisations that I've consulted with. And you can see there in some of the kind of the cloud boxes, some of the common issues that I think a lot of organisations have problems with, whether that's being technology focused only, whether it's having a lack of a functional strategy and the connectivity to the vision, whether it's about reskilling or talent acquisition or change management. They're all things that businesses struggle with. Data quality or the lack of data or an abundance of data, conversely, is a big one. And a whole, we could have a whole discussion on data and the reason why it's so important. But I think fundamentally, you can see at the bottom there, every business needs to invest in and understanding itself, because these things will differ for each business. And there is no prescription for transformation. Yes, there's commonalities, there's themes which everyone's interested in, but the journey and the creation of your vision and your strategy and how you deliver that is always going to be unique to every business. So you need to invest to understand that. So finding your why. And apologies if I'm going through this at pace. I've recently worked for a supercar manufacturer, so I'm kind of in my DNA. But I do want to leave some time for questions at the end, perhaps 2 or 3 more minutes than perhaps were scheduled. So you need to ask yourself some questions, as I was saying. And probably my favourite 2 on here, I would say, would be, what do our customers care about? And what do others do well that we do? And the answer to those questions will actually give you an indication of whether you're structured to deliver what the organisation has set as its strategy. And often there's a disconnect between those 2 elements in terms of the strategy and what you're trying to do in terms of delivering whatever it is you're delivering, whether that's functional supply chain and logistics, whether it's procurement, whether it's marketing, whether it's something else. So you get to a point where you start to realise, do you have an operating model which is aligned to the strategy and the aspirations of the organisation? And as I say, quite often the answer is it's misaligned. So you have to change it, right? If that's the case, you have to change it. And just to give a few examples of organisations that have gone through some quite dramatic changes in their operating model, you can see there on the right-hand side in terms of Lego, Amazon and Netflix. They all looked at their operating model and changed them drastically dependent on what the strategy of the organisation was. So we all need to think about these things, because transformation is almost pointless if you don't have the right operating model to deliver what the strategy of the business is trying to succeed. And when designing that operating model, it's about the connectivity between the strategy of the organisation and the foundation that you build to deliver the strategy. And what we tend to see, or the tools that we can use, is really dimensions of the different business when looking at the operating model. Now, I'm not going to read all of those dimensions. Are these presentations being made available to people after the conference?
The entire video will be made available. Yeah.
Right, okay. So I'm not going to talk through all of the dimensions because we purely don't have time, but they add some context to the discussion. But we always look at people, process and technology, and not one of those 3 is the most important. They are all equally important, but the sequence in which you look at them will just change depending on where you are in the business and what areas you're trying to look at. So I won't go through all of that, but obviously you've got some detail that will be made available, hopefully with a showcase of the slides. And I just want to give an overview of a case study of a recent organisation that I worked with, and the power of looking at the operating model can be quite substantial. So this is an organisation, a luxury manufacturing business, who manufactures a very, very expensive, glamorous product. So looking at the strategy of the organisation and then looking at the business processes and the capabilities which it had, it was clearly evident there was a misalignment, as I was describing just a couple of moments ago. So going through a self-reflection, almost a diagnostic of the whole of the supply chain organisation through a consultative partner actually gave us a view of having two work streams, one which was process focused and the other which was technology enabled. And going through that kind of diagnostic and looking at the outcomes, it really identified a number of quick wins, a number of longer to mid-term projects, looking at the processes and the capability, but ultimately it led to changing the operating model of that organisation. And that operating model was very much moving towards a service, an outsourced service capability it required. The important thing here is that it wasn't a quick process. The actual plan was a progressive plan which didn't risk the organisation's ability to have product delivered to it and in turn deliver its product to its customers. And actually the roadmap and the journey created for this organisation actually delivered a 58% cost per unit reduction in how they operated that function, which is actually pretty dramatic. Now, they're on that journey and they might not get to 58%. I would say it'll be somewhere between 40 and 60. Where the end number will be, time will tell. But regardless of where that end number ends up being, that's a pretty dramatic change in the cost profile of how that organisation operates as the business without a deterioration in the service. So that's the power of changing the operating model and why it's fundamentally so important, which then allows you to start to build in those other capabilities and resiliency technologies that we'll touch on in a moment. So resiliency, okay, one of the favourite things over the last 2 or 3 years. So what is resiliency? Again, just a few clouds to invoke a few thoughts. Is it hype? Is it utopia? Is it difficult? Is it just a buzzword? It probably means something slightly different to all of us, and that's okay. What I've started to figure out, probably about 18 months ago, is that resiliency is actually a continuum. It's not something that happens once every 10 to 20 years, maybe once or twice in our careers. You know, these black swan events are happening quite frequently. And I actually thought, 18 months ago, where we were kind of just getting out of that COVID stuff and companies had been surviving by the skin of their teeth, and actually some of those organisations were starting to recover, and actually they were moving towards this kind of time to thrive. Ukraine hit. We've now got an energy crisis. We've now got other issues which are happening in our global world, which also affect how businesses operate. So actually, where we were kind of thriving, some of those organisations are now struggling to survive. So this is a cyclical continuum, and this is going to continue. So when we talk about the new norm, this is the new norm. The only difference with this is the timeline and the frequency. This is the continuum that's going to continue to happen. So we need to develop resiliency as being part of our daily drumbeat of operation. It's not a let's forget about it because COVID was 2 years ago. This is every day now. So what do supply chains need to be? Again, I'm not going to read all of this. Hopefully you'll be able to pick this up from the shared media. But really, five key things. They have to be resilient, which may mean something slightly different to all of you, and that's okay. They need to be sustainable, because resilience and sustainability are surely hand in hand. They need to be integrated into the global supply chain. Now, we've had some discussions earlier about how you connect into the upstream, whether that's second, third, fourth tier and beyond. But that global supply chain really drives a resiliency. It doesn't come from purely the first tier. Of course, agility. Being resilient makes us more agile. and how we can respond to those threats and those pressures. And then any solution that you build has to be efficient and effective, and the use of things like automation can help with those things. So the guiding principles. So when you're looking to develop and build a capability, whether that's organically or whether it's with the use of some help, you have to have a solution that will mitigate those risks to supply. You have to have a solution that enables data decision making very, very quickly. You have to look to optimize your business processes. As I spoke earlier about people, process, technology, they all require you to change how you work as an organization, whether that's the people through standard operating procedures, whether it's retraining, reskilling, you have to change as an organization. And it has to enable sustainable future, because that's the only way forward for us. And you'll find that a lot of the technology and data will help to harmonise the needs of resiliency alongside with sustainability. So one thing that I'd like to just kind of raise and share is a point of view that the challenges for supply chain are very, very similar to that of procurement or purchasing organisations. And actually the point of view that I've got and the work I've been doing in the last kind of 18 months to 2 years actually brings in the need to develop solutions that actually solves problems in both procurement and supply chain. So what you see here is a map. The map is basically different risk themes. So you can see supplier intelligence, you can see supplier risk insights, category intelligence, and so on. Now with those risk themes, there is different types of information or data that you would want to collect to help you to mitigate those different types of risks, right? But you don't necessarily want to be buying data from every man and his dog. All of those different data sources, it can become complex, it can become expensive, it's actually not very usable. So you really want to think about how you're going to collect the data that you're interested in as a business. So when you build your solution, when you approach this, whether you're, let's say, I don't know, 2/10 of the journey through, and you know what sustainability and resiliency means for you, perhaps you know what your use cases are, which is this defined stage, or you may need some help with that because it's different for everyone. You then need to think about segmentation, and that will come in depending on how big you are as an organisation and how many suppliers you're procuring from. You may have 200 suppliers, you may have 10,000 suppliers. That scalability is really, really important, and that will play into your strategy about segmentation and what that means. Is it top 50 spend? Is it top 50 criticality for supply? What is it? It'll be different for everyone. So then when you design your solution, hopefully you've got some technology, you've got partners, you've got data being fed to you, you know how to use it, you've segmented it, you then implement the solution. You actually have your different personas, you've got your different people in the organisation that can run and hopefully then deliver value as a business. Quantifying how that value is measured, again, something which can be quite tricky, but it's crucially important. So going back to this map, but just giving you an example of what's out there. And there's many, many more, okay? I'm not selling any technology, any partnership here. I'm just giving you a view of what's out there. So those different risk themes that I talked about earlier, there's technology or there's data sources that actually provide that information. But again, if you've got a very large organisation, both procurement and supply chain, and you're interested in a lot of these different risk themes and these elements within those risk themes, you don't want to be going to 30 or 40 different companies for that data. One would think we would all like to go to a centralised repository which is very, very well connected to all of these data sources so that you can actually maximise and generate the insights through central intelligence. based upon what the business requirements are. Those business requirements are going to be your risk themes and your use cases, which will be different from all of you. So the key message, really important one here, is that when you start to think about technology and partnerships, you need to think about what's my use cases, what's my priorities, and how does that map to the data. So you can go through one technology partner, but what's their data ecosystem? That's the key question, because that connection, that mapping, is going to give you the biggest bang for the buck in terms of connecting to what you want as a business. And as I said before, you can go on that journey yourselves, or you can get some help with that, but there's massive value in approaching it in that way. And that's how you build the system to support your business requirements, your key risk themes, and your sub-risk elements within those key risk themes. So as I say, not selling anything here, but just an example of why it's so important to understand the data, the mapping, and the business requirements. And if you do all of that well, you start to get in gear. So you've understood your business, you've identified your goals, your priorities, you've got your vision in place, you perhaps collaborate and use partners along the journey, you try and remain technology agnostic until you really know whether there's a partner which is fit for purpose for you as an organisation. You stay process focused, people focused and process driven. You know your journey is common, but it's also unique, as we've talked about, your use cases, your risk themes. And if you do all those things well, you get track ready. And that's how you start winning the race. And that's my pitch over. So thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much, Ashley. You looped that back nicely to the racing car team again. I see what you did there. So we'll go to any questions. I know I have plenty of my own, but do we have any questions from the room to wrap things up today? It seems not immediately. So I'll go with what I was thinking of immediately. When you're talking about reviewing the operating model, because some of those examples there were very brave and bold and ultimately very, very successful decisions. What would be your suggestions about how to go about making that review to see if it is worth changing that operating model?
Yeah, I really think it's quite simple in terms of really taking some time to step back and understand what the strategy of the organisation is and whether as a functional leader, because I've been functional as a functional lead in logistics and supply chain and so forth. Are you behaving in a way that's going to allow you to deliver what you need to deliver to meet the corporate objectives? And often the answer, the result is quite negative. So I think you just need to step back and say, am I doing things in a way that's going to allow me to be successful? And if the answer is no, you've got to start to propose those changes and develop the business case for doing so. And it doesn't have to be any more complex than that. It's really about understanding yourself.
And next thing I'd want to go into is we were talking briefly at the end there about partnering with different tech. How would you because it is a confusing old marketplace out there. There's an awful lot of options. Everyone says they've got a solution,
yep.
And I'm sure, and there's some brilliant ideas out there. Don't get me wrong. How would you advise people to actually go about trying to make those decisions in an informed way?
Yeah, you have to know what your use cases are. What are the problems you're trying to solve? And once you've understood the problems you're trying to solve and what's important to you in terms of measuring, you need to start asking some fundamental questions of whether those technology partners have the right attributes and have the right data that supports solving those challenges and those use cases. And that's where the mapping is really, really important, because as you rightly say, every tech company, like every consultant, let's be honest, they will all tell you that they can solve your problem, that they're right for you. Actually, you've got to invest a little bit in yourself. You've got to invest a little bit into understanding why a tech solution is right for you. It's not because you've got a sales guy which is offering you dinner, and you've got to invest a little bit to know why someone's right for you. And a lot of the time businesses don't. It's whoever's flavour. And that's why you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different technology companies all working within a business, and it's all misjoined. There's no strategy around the architecture, and you have to go through that process.
And finally, you've gone through your experience, which is extensive. What advice would you give for people who are in sort of earlier stages of their career in the procurement and supply chain industry? They're trying to roll with all the changes. What advice would you give for them?
In terms of developing their career?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think you have to invest in understanding technology. If I use an example, when I was at Tata Consultancy Services, 5 years ago, that was my first real kind of exposure to technology and digitalisation. And I'd come from a lot of experience in industry and leadership roles, and it blew my mind away, to be honest. I was almost a fish out of water, but actually it was the best thing for me because I really understood about 4.0, digitalisation. I'm not an expert in any one field, but I've got enough knowledge to know what I'm talking about. And I would say you have to be aware of the technology whilst developing your leadership skills. But technology is becoming so important.
It's the direction of travel. Ashley, really enjoyed your company today. Thanks ever so much.
Okay.
Round of applause for Ashley, please.
Okay.